Welcome back, everyone, as we continue our look at the story of the great heathen army, which invaded and conquered large parts of what we know today as England in the later part of the 9th century. And we're using our friends over at Kings and Generals. We're going to be watching their second part of that series today. If you did not see the first part of my reaction, the link's in the description, so you can check that out, as well as the link to Kings and Generals' original content. Please check them out. I am proud to be a patron of theirs. I know they subscribe to this channel, so it's a mutual admiration society, and I think you should definitely check out their channel if you're interested in videos like this one. Let's dive in.
In 865, the invading Great Heathen Army swept through Britain like wildfire, and after 6 years of violent struggle, the political map of Britain had been completely redrawn. The ruling dynasties in East Anglia and Northumbria had been swept away and their lands taken by the newcomers. Mercia teetered on the brink of a total collapse, its east flooded by marauding Scandinavians. Various rulers of Pictland fought on to retain their independence, and even the Welsh had their fair share to deal with.
So notice who he hasn't mentioned yet, and that's Wessex. And Wessex is going to be the hero of this story if you're on the Anglo-Saxon side.
Yet one kingdom remained intact. Wessex, under their king Alfred, managed to pay a group of invading Vikings under Halfdan to leave his kingdom. Yet similar agreements were made and broken before, so Alfred knew that sooner or later the Vikings would be back.
And Alfred's a really intelligent guy. That's the main thing he has going for him. He's smart, he's cunning. He's not this great physical strength warrior, as we mentioned in the last episode. And so he has to know he's just buying time. But that's what he needs. He's new to the throne. All these other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms are falling by the wayside or severely weakened by the great heathen armies. And so he's buying time. He's buying time for him to get the support and the strength he needs to be able to fight back.
Ivar, who hadn't been present during the Wessex campaign, was busy in the north.
So I want to talk about Ivar the Boneless for just a minute. Like I said before, a lot of what we know about the story of Ragnar Lothbrok and his children is told to us in such a way that we really don't know if it's history or if it's just one of those kind of mythological King Alfred type, or King, oh my gosh, I hate when this happens when you draw a blank on a name like that. King Arthur is what I meant. King Arthur. It's kind of a King Arthur story. Like, there's probably some truth in there, but how much of it is real and how much of it is just kind of this like epic story that's been told. So there's almost certainly a guy named Ragnar Lothbrok, and he definitely had children, and we know that they were present during this heathen army. But how much of the details of their story is true, we don't really know for sure. But here's what we know. Based on the stories that have been told. Ivar the Boneless. What does that name even mean? Well, it's translated a couple of different ways. It could mean he didn't have legs. It could mean he didn't have bones in his legs. It could mean he was crippled, which is how he's portrayed in the History Channel's series Vikings. It also, in at least one place in those epic tales, infers that what it means is he was impotent. So it's hard to say for sure. And we don't see him, for example, in The Last Kingdom TV series, even though he's actually a character in the books, which I plan on reading because a lot of you have been recommending that to me. But Ragnar's sons are tough, but they're all kind of doing their own thing a little bit in some ways.
He was joined by his ally, a Viking sea king of Dublin, Olaf the White. In 870, they attacked the capital of the Brythonic kingdom of Altclud, Dumbarton Rock.
Altclud, and you can hear kind of the name, Strathclyde, I think is what it's called today. A lot of these ancient names you can see reflected today. And we talked about that in the last episode, especially in this area here, like Northumbria and Yorkshire and places that are further north. You see a lot of the remnants of the Viking names for places. Whereas you see a lot more Anglo-Saxon names further south.
They besieged it for 4 months before the defenders finally gave in, but no quarter was given. The citadel was razed, its defenders slain, and the survivors were taken to be sold at the slave markets of Dublin and York. Ivar made off with so much plunder that he possibly retired, and
he's like, I got all I need, I'm comfortable, I'm out, see ya. Have fun with all the fighting.
Luckily for Wessex, he wouldn't reappear again on English shores. Despite that, Ivar and Olaf's descendants in Dublin would continue to play a huge role in Britain and Ireland for centuries to come. After his withdrawal from Essex in 871, Halfdan headed north to
And Halfdan is the brother of Ivar. These are both sons of Ragnar.
Northumbria with half of the Viking army, around 1,000 or so veterans who he had been fighting with since his arrival in Britain. When he arrived in the north, he began to divide the lands between his men and set about ploughing the fields. This wasn't conquest anymore, it was colonization.
Yep.
Meanwhile, in East Anglia, the second half of the army that had attacked Wessex was now under the command of a newcomer. Guthrum and his great summer army had provided a breath.
And it's kind of interesting if you look here at kind of, at this point, Wessex controls not only what was traditionally the kingdom of Wessex, but now they've taken places like Cornwall and Devon. They've taken Essex now. And Sussex and those kind of places, and right here, London, Reading, those are kind of the border towns right on the edge, and so these are fortresses that I believe London is actually part of the Kingdom of Mercia at this point.
Newcomer. Guthrum and his great summer army had provided a breath of fresh air into the now exhausted veterans of the initial expedition. And now, along with Halfdan's warriors up in Northumbria, they set their eyes upon carving up the severely weakened Mercia. Alfred's brother-in-law, King Burgred of Mercia, was forced into exile in 874.
So again, you can see why Alfred's in a good place. He's bought time for himself. He's also got Mercia as kind of this buffer kingdom in between him and the Danes. And so all of that's allowing him to build up his strength, build up his wealth, build up his ability to fight when the time comes and kind of be the savior of the Anglo-Saxons.
And a puppet ruler, Ceolwulf, was put in his place while the Vikings divided up the land. Wessex now stood alone, the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom not to fall. In 875, the Vikings started to test the defences of Alfred's kingdom. Small fleets of 5 or 6 vessels continuously raided, showing Alfred that invasion was possible from any direction.
So he's got to deal with a land invasion along the Thames here and then all the way up to Gloucester. And then he's also got to deal with a sea invasion from any number of places. Just look at how long that coast is that he's got to defend there.
Like all of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Wessex had an army of levies that could be called upon in times of war.
So levies are, think National Guard today. They're not full-time soldiers. They're not a standing army that's just ready. They're more of a militia that can be called up at any given time.
These farmers fought with what equipment and armour they owned, which usually wasn't very much. They weren't a professional standing army like the Scandinavians. After the campaign season was over, they would traditionally return back to their lands as they had done for generations. Alfred's personal retinue of professional warriors probably only consisted of a few hundred men. Guthrum, on the other hand, had many thousands of warriors, the vast majority of them hardened from a lifetime of war. They could live off the land, and as long as they could keep supply lines open with East Anglia and Mercia, they could ravage Wessex almost at will. In 876, Guthrum thundered across Wessex with a large host of mounted warriors. He defeated a small force of West Saxons led by Alfred on the south coast and seized the important regional town of Wareham. Alfred sued for peace again, and Guthrum accepted, both sides probably hoping to buy more time.
Especially Alfred.
The next spring, Guthrum was on the move again, and this time he headed even further to the west. His target was Exeter. Exeter provided a number of options for Guthrum should he need to retreat. Yet there was also another reason why Guthrum had chosen to take his men there. He was drawing Alfred away from a second threat.
So this is strategy versus tactics, right? So people keep asking me, what's the difference when you're talking about a good strategist versus a good tactician? Well, strategy is the big picture. It's the whole campaign. It's the whole map, so to speak. Tactics are what you do on an individual battlefield. So this is strategy. And you don't always see this happening from the Vikings. But in this case, you definitely do. And what's happening is Guthrum is marching through Wessex. He's going down here. And now strategically, he's thinking, okay, if I get in a difficult situation, I can escape by sea if I need to. In the meantime, drawing Alfred, who's already outnumbered and outmanned as far as the power of his army goes. And now this is going to allow allies of the Danes to come down in behind Alfred. And you're looking at a situation here where this could be the end of the Anglo-Saxons in Britain.
Was drawing Alfred away from a second threat. Another army, commanded by Ivar Ragnarsson, had Irish and Frisian Vikings in its ranks.
So this is now a third brother, a son of Ragnar, Ivar Ragnarsson. You know, that's where the name comes from. So if you've ever met somebody who has a name like that, like Anderson, there's a good chance that somewhere along the line, it was a Scandinavian name, and the person was the son of Anders. Williamson, same thing. And a lot of these names. In England, Fitz means the same thing. It means son of. So Fitz Randolph would be the son of Randolph. Things like that.
It overwintered on the south coast of Wales and was now making its way down the north coast of Devon. This army of 4,000 Vikings was carried by 120 longboats. The situation looked grim for Alfred. However, in one of the most fortuitous moments of chance ever to befall England, Ivar's fleet was destroyed by a freak storm off the coast of Dorset.
And you have to think, I mean, even today you would be like, man, that's amazing. How did that happen? How did we get so lucky? 1,000 years ago or more, if you're a guy like Alfred, you're thinking God's on our side. God did this. He saved us. Now's our chance. Now we need to strike back. And this has happened at multiple times in history where you see storms hit at just the right time that saves a nation. And this is one of those times.
Leaving the survivors to limp back to their base in southern Wales. Upon hearing the news, Guthrum abandoned his plan and rode north to Gloucester in the south of Mercia. However, Alfred was still beset on all sides by armies of raiders intent on personally sacrificing him to Odin and usurping his kingdom. On the 6th of January 878, in the midst of the Christmas festival that was an important part of Anglo-Saxon culture, Guthrum threw all of his cards on the table and suddenly appeared at Alfred's royal estate at Chippenham with a mounted force of his best outriders. This surprise attack, possibly launched in conjunction with treacherous West Saxon ealdormen, very nearly ended Alfred there and then. He barely escaped with his life.
So treacherous West Saxon ealdormen. So you have to put yourself in their position, and this is again something that happens all throughout history. You've got somebody who is on the side of Alfred, but they're reading the handwriting on the wall, and they're thinking, okay, this is this great heathen army has conquered everybody else. It's really we've been buying time. It's really only a matter of time before they take us down too. I need to start thinking about what comes next and whose side I'm going to be on. And so they're placing their bets, and they're putting their bets with Guthrum. They're thinking this is where my best chance lies. So it's easy to pass judgment and say they were traitors, but they're covering their own backsides.
With just a handful of followers, whilst Guthrum sent his warriors in swift pursuit. Alfred fled west deep into the marshlands of the Somerset Levels, at the time a vast area of undrained boggy wetlands.
And this is all of this is stuff you see in The Last Kingdom if you watch that series. Alfred looks like he's done. He was never a great warrior to begin with, and at this point you have to think there's no chance. I mean, there's no reasonable opportunity for Alfred to get his kingdom back, let alone grow it.
He knew the area well, having spent much of his youth there, while Guthrum had no such knowledge of the intricate riverways and secret paths. Alfred set up his base on the island of Athelney in order to make his final stand with just a few hundred followers. Had Alfred failed, or given up and ran like Burgred of Mercia did, England would have become Daneland. Guthrum stood on the very brink of becoming king in not just East Anglia and parts of Mercia, but Wessex too. For the next several months it was Alfred who was forced to launch raids into his own kingdom, now overrun by Guthrum's warriors. After hearing of Guthrum's success, Ivar returned to Wessex to take part in the division of the kingdom, this time with only 23 ships.
I need to get my piece. That's what he's thinking.
He made landfall somewhere in northern Devon, near a fortress called Kinwit. This location was selected with intent to corner Alfred in a pincer movement after his withdrawal to the wetlands of Somerset.
So again, strategy.
Rather than the easy campaign he had hoped for, however, Ivar was met there by the ealdorman of Somerset, Odda, who had levied his fyrdmen to drive out the invaders. It was there, at the Battle of Kinwit in 878, that Ivar, the last living son of Ragnar, was struck down in battle. Guthrum was left overextended by the destruction of Ivar's force at Kinwit, and this appears to have allowed Alfred and his ealdormen to break up Guthrum's exposed supply lines and lines of communication. Alfred then called as many of the fyrdmen of Somerset, Wiltshire and Hampshire as he could.
So here's the comeback, and all they needed to hear was, okay, we've won a victory against the Vikings. We've got a shot. We can beat these people. And now everybody starts coming out of the woodwork, and they're going to fight back, and they're going to rally behind Alfred.
Only counties left to have any semblance of West Saxon government. For 3 long days between the 4th and the 7th of May, they waited at a local rallying point, called Egbert's Stone, for their warriors to arrive from all corners of the kingdom. Finally, once a sufficient force had been raised, probably several thousand levies with only a few hundred professional household soldiers, they marched to Eddington, where...
So here's the thing. You can win against a professional army with levies, with unprofessional, untrained soldiers, guys that... And listen, they're not completely untrained. It's not like they're coming right out of the fields with no experience. They have learned how to fight. They're not the professional Viking soldiers, but they know what they're doing. They're not completely clueless. But what this requires is great leadership. You can overcome bad leadership with great warriors, and you can overcome subpar warriors with great leadership on a tactical level. And that's what they're going to get with Alfred.
Alfred engaged Guthrum's warriors in one final definitive battle that would decide the fate of Wessex once and for all. A ferocious battle ensued as the two shield walls crashed against one another. All day the two sides fought, until finally the smaller Danish force broke and fell back to their fortress at Chippenham. The West Saxons had no mercy for the Danes that day. They killed everyone who didn't make it inside the fortress and besieged Guthrum for 2 weeks before he sued for peace.
Now, if you are a Anglo-Saxon Christian army, and what's one of the biggest differences you have with the Danes? Well, it's religion. Well, so then what is one of the things you're going to do? And this is happening on the continent too, with Christian Romans who are fighting and and trying to subdue these heathen armies. How do you subdue them? Well, you get them to submit to your culture, to your religion, things like that.
In addition to offering the customary hostages and promising to leave Wessex for good, the Vikings promised that Guthrum would be baptized as a Christian.
Yep.
Alfred was convinced.
And you see this in the latest season of The Last Kingdom. You have a situation where you have the king of who's ruling Mercia and Wessex, who defeats the Northumbrian king, the king in York, and he basically offers him that deal. He says, "Okay, if you will submit to baptism, you can live." And he says, "No, I'm not going to do it," and he ends up being executed.
Convinced that this time the Vikings would keep their word. The Danes finally pulled out of Wessex entirely, retreating back to East Anglia, where Guthrum became king. In 886, Mercia was divided between Guthrum and Alfred, with the Anglo-Saxons retaining control of the western portion of the country and the Danes settling the east. It was an extraordinary turnaround for Alfred and the West Saxons. Not only had he saved the kingdom, but now he found himself in a relatively strong position. Tensions would flare up every now and again, but by and large, Guthrum would keep the peace, giving Alfred the breathing room he needed to fortify his country against further invasions from overseas, of which there would be many more over the coming years.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up right there. We'll be back tomorrow with the final episode of this 3-part series, and then we're going to move on to whatever it is that our patrons have voted on to be our next video or next series. So this is your last chance to get in there and vote today and tomorrow, because on Friday we will begin that new series. Thanks for watching.